I was not comfortable with what people were asking economists to do. The problem with forecasting is it's about the future. I think what has to stay the same really is the principles on which we've created the company, our values, and what our mission is. And then everything else has to be at least capable of changing. This is not the world that I want to leave my children and grandchildren. The polarization, the nature of political distrust, the functioning of the public sector. One of the senior directors came up to me afterwards and he said, "Eric, I just want you to know, my brother was the last one they pulled out alive."
Welcome back. My name is Daniel Sanchez, CEO and founder of Reekolect. We're here at the Digital Legacy Podcast, and we're currently filming here in the Rice Estate at Turner Hill, and we have a very special guest with us here today, Eric Herr. Eric, thank you so much for joining the podcast. How are you today?
I'm fine. Thank you, Daniel.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, Eric, we always start off with a quick little bio just to kind of set the tone for the audience. That way they know a little bit about you, then we could take the conversation anywhere we like. Sounds good?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, quick little bio here on Eric. So, ex-president of Autodesk, previously the 5th largest PC software company in the world, board chair and H Together, held president, principal, and C-suite roles at top tech companies like Sun Microsystems, Taleo Corp, is that how you pronounce it? Taleo Corp. Workspace, PayScale, Starsight, and McGraw-Hill Publications and Data Resources Incorporated. And director roles at American Red Cross, Hampshire Charitable Foundation, Northern Forest Center, New Hampshire Center for Public Policy Studies, and other nonprofits. Sound about right?
All true.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, Eric, let's start naturally. Let's start from the beginning. You could tell me a little bit about how your career started, how it evolved.
Well, it actually started in on the staff of the President's Council of Economic Advisors. And I stayed in economics through 3 companies, but gradually decided that people thought economists could do things I knew they couldn't do, and I wanted to get into business. So I went to McGraw-Hill Publishing, first as the economist, but then when I left there 8 years later, I was executive vice president. And then had a series of roles, and if you actually looked at my resume, the only conclusion you can possibly draw is I can't hold a job.
Absolutely. And you were just touching on, during that time, tell me a little bit more about that era and what the thought process was about evolving into business and transitioning on your own.
Well, part of it really was I was not comfortable with what people were asking economists to do. As I used to joke, the problem with forecasting is it's about the future. And at the same time, I became increasingly enamored with real business and what it was about. So, and I guess lastly, forecasting gross domestic product for the 18th time loses its charm. So I morphed into a businessman, first in staff roles, but gradually moving into line management and then executive management.
And Eric, tell me, as you were growing up, let's say we were in high school and we were in a class, what were you like? What was your personality like if we were sitting next to each other?
Well, I enjoyed class, but I only worked on the subjects I enjoyed. So, for example, in college, I made a bet with my college roommate that I could cut more classes in calculus than he could, and I went to 2 classes that semester.
And still passed.
I got an A, yeah.
Oh, wow. More than just passed.
Yeah, I snuck by. But, to me, what was important in all those assignments was just as learning as much as I could. So, in part, I wanted to make sure I surrounded myself and worked with the best and brightest people I could find. Because at that point in your career, it's about learning, absorbing more than anything else.
And do you feel like, did you inherit that from, was there a particular, figure in your life, whether it be mom or dad, that really influenced you, or how did you feel about that?
Well, education was always important to both my mom and dad, but in addition, frankly, I wanted to please them. They were pretty competitive, and accomplishment was important to them.
And that competitive nature, what did that instill in you that you felt that you could apply towards business and use it as an advantage?
Well, early on, it was, I remember in my first 2 jobs, I essentially worked every day of the year. First at the President's Council of Economic Advisors, and then at another economic consulting company called DRI. But over time, particularly after kids, it became clear that there was more to my life than work. And so I sought a little more balance. The other thing that happened was early on in my career, the first time I was a manager, it became clear, while I thought naively that I was going to make all the big decisions, it became very clear to me that my job was actually to help the team make decisions, provide the framework for them to make decisions and make fewer and fewer decisions. In fact, by the time I got to be president of Autodesk, my internal argument was, listen, I'm going to make 5 decisions this year. They're really important decisions. My task is to set this place up so that you all, several thousand people, can make the best decisions you can possibly make.
And that's very powerful, right? So when you're thinking about the hierarchy, especially in the corporate world, a manager, right? When someone finally goes, let's say, from an entry level and supervisor and so on, to get to that manager level, some insight that you just gave into that. Essentially, as you begin to go higher into the hierarchy, let's say, within an organization, you make less and less decisions, but they are decisions that hold a lot of weight. Now, with that, you need to build a strong team under you, right? And in your opinion, what was important when you were selecting those type of managers or executive board members or C-suites? What did you look for? Was it something in their personality? Was it certain business acumen? What did you feel would build a strong team?
Well, there's, of course, a skill set that's associated with a particular role.
Right, of course.
But more than that, it's about principles and values. It's about fitting in with the team. And the 2 questions I asked every interview for the last 20 years was, what do you want to learn next? And what are you reading? Because I wanted people that were intellectually alive and also self-aware enough to know that there are things they needed to work on, because the organization we were going to need in 3 years and the people we would need and the skill sets we would need would be different in 3 years than they are today. So we needed a dynamic organization that was capable of keeping up with the pace of change in the world. And part of what I argued with all my teams was, listen, if we're good at change, we'll win, because very few companies keep up with the pace of change in the real world. So we need to be better at change than everyone else. And that doesn't mean, the corollary of that is we need to know what has to stay the same so that everything else can change. And what has to stay the same? Our mission, our commitments to each other, and our values.
Let me ask you a question on that specifically. A lot of businesses sometimes struggle to make change, especially from a technological perspective, right? For instance, you might have a company that's scaling and they've hit 30 million with no marketing, let's just say, for instance, just traditional referral type of system. And then comes a marketing company that might be flashing AI or flashing some sort of new wave type of strategy to be able to drive, either be more leads or overall more revenue. And a lot of businesses are reluctant. So it's interesting when you say that you have to somewhat adapt and embrace change, but you said you have to see exactly what should stay the same and what shouldn't. That's very powerful. What do you think about that when it comes to from a technology perspective?
Well, I made this argument in 2 technology companies, and in both of them, and some from board levels. I think what has to stay the same really is the principles on which we've created the company, our values, and what our mission is. And then everything else has to be at least capable of changing. And one of the ways I would do that, there were 2 devices I used to sort of force myself to think about change. One is, if I was going to take out my own company, how would I do it? What would I do to outcompete my own company and then adapt to that risk? And the second was, I always asked myself, what assumptions am I making? And what happens if I relax one of those assumptions? If it just isn't true that I need to do an upgrade every 2 years, if instead I can stream upgrades quarterly when we're still doing that with CDs, and then later with over the internet, and just try to force us to think differently. And I wanted people that forced us. I wanted to be surrounded by people who thought me and who taught me to think outside my comfort zone and helped each other think outside their comfort zone.
Very powerful, very powerful. Now, thinking about that, going back to the team structure, when you're looking at your leadership style, could you define that?
I'm probably not sufficiently self-aware to be able to answer that well. I would say, and at times I had to do this, listen, we can disagree about strategy, we can disagree about the changes, we can disagree about operations, we can disagree about all kinds of things, but if you disagree, if you violate the principles and the values of this company, it'll take me a nanosecond to decide what to do.
Of course, absolutely. At that point, you gotta
Yeah.
Get rid of
There's
them.
certain lines you don't cross.
And you as a leader, especially when you were serving as the president in Autodesk, when did you know when to somewhat bend, not necessarily bend the rules, but let me reframe that. When did you allow yourself to go with a suggestion or recommendation of your executive C-suite and your team versus saying, I know this is the right way, I know that this is the direction we have to go, let's do it this way? How would you evaluate that circumstance?
Actually, very late in my career there, I had an example where two upper middle level managers right below C-suite violated the values of the company. And in the same party, in the same country. And when I found out about it, I couldn't believe it. But, and I was ready to fire both of them. But the lawyer who handled human resources for us convinced me that it would be more powerful if they would agree to use them as a teaching device for the organization. And one agreed, and one didn't. So the one who didn't was fired, and the one who agreed helped us make the changes that I thought we needed to make in that part of the organization.
Very interesting, the way you position that. That's phenomenal. So, and then Eric, so let's talk about today. What are you doing today?
Well, frankly, I've extracted myself from all my boards, and most of my not-for-profit activity and activities for the state of New Hampshire, save one thing outside my family right now, and that is, this is not the world that I want to leave my children and grandchildren. The polarization, the nature of political distrust, the functioning of the public sector. So I've become involved in something called New Hampshire Together, which is trying to realize the way we started, the way the Constitution starts, which is we the people in order to form a more perfect union. So in New Hampshire Together, we're engaging the people, getting them to be more active in terms of policy. We do that with listening sessions, surveys, a citizens assembly, and when we actually created 4 initiatives with supermajority support from that assembly, and we're trying to drive change on civics education, election and voting information from the Secretary of State, a new bill to go from an open partisan primary system to a single ballot primary system, and then substituting a citizens commission for the legislature creating voting districts, all with an eye toward making the citizens the center of the public sector more than just the parties.
And why is that so important to you?
I think the current track and trajectory bodes ill for the future. And I can't sit by and not try to work on that on behalf of future generations. It's too important.
Of course. Is there any advice that you would give to, nowadays business owners, entrepreneurs, anyone that has the ability to make an impact? Is there any advice that you would tell them about regarding the future? Because again, you're concerned about the future, right? It's something that we should be concerned with. We should think about what are our activities today, what it will bring about in the future, right? So essentially, any advice that you would give to any inspiring entrepreneur to think about not only today, but worry about tomorrow?
Well, I would say 2 things. At Autodesk, we talked about our mission was to provide software tools to transform ideas into reality. In South Africa, they used our software tools to drive kiosks that helped inform the blacks in South Africa for the first time ever what it meant to vote and how they would do it. In Lithuania, they used our software to map the country. And why did they do that? To create private property in Lithuania and the freedom that suggests. The Oklahoma City federal building was designed with our product, AutoCAD. And a third-party software package was developed to estimate the most stable parts of damaged buildings. And so the Oklahoma City team called our team up right away after the building was blown up, asked them to come and bring the software. They did. And we saved lives in that situation. Our software helped save lives in that situation. And 10 years later, I was giving a speech for the American Red Cross senior disaster directors and talking about thinking of themselves as a network of organizations, including software companies and all kinds of other companies, and used this as an example. The Oklahoma City case is an example of this higher order mission. One of the senior directors came up to me afterwards and he said, Eric, I just want you to know my brother was the last one they pulled out alive. And you go, yeah, I guess we hit our mission. Wow. And what I would say to business people today is, listen, you have lots of skill sets. You need to use them to the community you're serving in business, but they are also applicable to beyond your business life. I've served every governor in New Hampshire since I retired in '99. I worked for one of the presidential candidates as an economist recently. I worked in the White House in the early '70s. There's a lot to give, and those skill sets that you develop in business have broader application than just business.
Wow. Wow. Very powerful. Very powerful. Absolutely. Eric, if I could just finish up with this one last question. I know I said that, but this one last one. I know what you've done and you've been able to share with us incredible insight and this wisdom. How do you want to be remembered?
My daughter just asked me that question. I said, my answer to her was, I actually don't expect to or want to be really remembered for very long. What I want is for the people whose lives I've touched to live different lives and be different because of some role I played. I'm under no illusions of my changing the world, but I'd like to think I had a small effect on my kids and my grandkids.
That's a great note to end off with. Well, Eric, thank you so much. That was very deep, and I really appreciate the time you took here with our podcast. If anybody wants to know anything more about your organization, where can they go?
You can go to New Hampshire Together on the internet, and we've got a good website, and we're trying to take this concept national because there's a need.
Absolutely. Well, Eric, again, thank you so much. I appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Thank you.
Until then, thank you for joining us.